The Nikkor Z 50mm f1.4 is a full-frame lens launched on September 9th, 2024 for $499.95. It was the second prime lens of its kind after the 35mm f1.4, both of which are non-S-line lenses, and an interesting idea from Nikon that wider aperture does not have to mean more expensive or more premium. But interestingly enough, it is the 1 billionth 50mm that Nikon has released for the Z system. That's a joke, backed up by how it actually feels. Nikon USA doesn't bother telling us how many aperture blades, but the aperture range is f1.4 to f16 when it's stopped all the way down. I did count it, it's a 9-bladed aperture. It's constructed of 10 elements in 7 groups, one of which is aspherical, and its minimum focus distance is 1.22 feet or 0.37 meters. Dimensionally, it's 3 by 3.5 inches, or 74.5 by 86.5 millimeters, and weighs 14.9 ounces or 420 grams. Something seemed a little bit off, so I looked deeper. Nikon lists that this lens's included technologies are AS, E, IF, STM, and MFS, which means aspherical lens, electromagnetic diaphragm mechanism, internal focusing, stepping motor, and multi-focus system, which is basically every lens in the Nikon Z lineup. So I wasn't crazy, something did look weird, and that's there are no coatings listed for this lens. Not even super integrated, which I thought every single Nikon lens got just automatically. Apparently not. There's nothing else really to say, but it is listed as dust and drip resistant. So what do we think about this lens? It's not cheap feeling, really. It's got some nice weight to it. It is plastic, fantastic all over the place, except the lens mount. The lens mount is indeed metal. The place I rented this from definitely could do a better job of cleaning it, but you know. It is a fairly attractive looking lens. It looks pretty typical, less silly than some Nikon lenses. Aperture ring, which is fairly stiff, or a function ring. You can program this to do what you want. There is no auto and manual focus switch. There are no switches of any kind, but there is a focus ring which can be done with one finger. Feels very precise. I like that. It's not super duper smooth, but is very deliberate. For this 50mm f1.4, there is a lens hood, and it is rather normal looking. It's kind of the typical Nikon fare, but it is nice and rigid. I like that. It's not all flimsy and everything. That would probably be good protection if you bump this lens on something. I think the lens hood and the lens is going to be fine. There's really not much else going on with this lens. It's very simple. The 35mm f1.4 is very simple. It's kind of an interesting route that Nikon is going. Generally, historically, the wider the aperture, the more premium of the lens. That's the way that it's felt. We have the f1.8s in 20, 24, 35, 50, and 85, and those are all S-line lenses, and they have all of the good stuff in them. That's what S-line means. It means it's got the good stuff, the good coatings, you know. This doesn't have any of that, but it doesn't necessarily make it a bad lens. It just makes it a lens for a particular person. It is pretty interesting that Nikon kind of strips everything away, but it gives you an f1.4. So the people that wider aperture matters, they could appreciate this. If they don't care about having the best flare resistance and the best correction of chromatic aberrations and other things that you get out of the S-line lenses, and they really just want the widest aperture that they can get, I think this is totally fine. You're doing films, you know, doing some video, some independent filmmaking, maybe this is a good lens for you. Nikon does claim that it has silent autofocusing. We will test that in the field, which I think it is about time to go and do. All right, so we've got the 50mm f1.4 mounted up on the Z8 here. And the first thing we got to do is the focus speed test. I'd say the focus speed isn't too bad, although I'm pretty sure Nikon USA said silent, and I can definitely hear it focusing. Let's see if we can get that on camera. Now granted, I doubt that's going to be anything that like screws up video or anything like that, but it's not silent. Now we can run through our various saturations. Let's do a blue first on our lighter. I'd say blue and yellow look kind of normal. Let's do a blue sky here. Let's do green on the tractor over there. Now we got to come over here and do our black and white ability, our classic spot over here. And just to get an idea of sharpness, I'm going to bump this up to f2.8, f5.6. All right, now we need to get back into Lightroom and see what these test images look like. All right, so we are now in Lightroom with images from the Nikkor Z 50mm f1.4. My initial thought is that this is going to suffer from the same kind of issues as the 35mm f1.4, that more classic kind of fringing from the f-mount days that you would expect at wider apertures. That's what I'm expecting. But I am also kind of expecting this to be a better lens, in my opinion, than the 35 f1.4. Wasn't super impressed with that lens at that price. Now this lens is a little bit cheaper, just like the 50mm f1.8 is cheaper than the 35mm f1.8, which are both S-line lenses. The 50mm far outclasses the 35 1.8. And yeah, we do see fringing already. Now this is the most extreme. Thin object, absolutely blown out background. We got green there, we got purple there. This is the absolute worst case scenario. We'll see other more subtle scenarios later. Even in this highlight right here, got some green right there. That's exactly what I expected from this lens. That may not be an issue to some people, but you know, it's just there. I'm just showing you. See if we can get rid of it. We can, at least this severe piece right here, that's 11 on a manual correction here. We mostly fixed the green. There's still a little, but it's much less noticeable in those areas. That was the harsh one. Let's look at the purple. Yeah, we fixed the purple at 5 on manual correction. So it's there, easy to get rid of, no problem. As per usual, reds are good in Nikon lenses. This isn't as rich as some other ones. I'd call this just slightly more saturated than normal. The blue, however, is very, very saturated. So if blue is your thing, then there you go. This is what I call JPEGy blue. I usually pull them down a little bit. Good saturation on the blue, very, very saturated. Let's check out yellow. Yellow is pretty darn good. Let's take a look at the lighter. Yep, that is more saturated than natural. So color saturation is getting good marks on this lens. Let's look at the green. Green is kind of more on the normal side, maybe slightly more saturated than what is natural. So overall, high marks in saturation. Looks pretty good. Let's get into the initial sharpness here. There's some of that fringing. See, I always get fringing on these screws and lenses that are not well controlled for it, and we can see that we do have it right there. But this is a less expensive lens. It's kind of more in the tradition of wider apertures mean more issues, and you got to stop down to get away from those issues. And that's not the case with many modern lenses, but did this one at f2.8, and you can see that that fringing is gone. Let's do a little comparison here. That's at f1.4, soft, not that sharp at f1.4. We go to f2.8, it's gone, sharpens up. And if we come down here, we do still see some of that silliness in here, these weird greens and purples. It's a less expensive lens, so you know you gotta have a little give, some reasonable give. Don't see any fringing up here. That's good. There is some fringing around here in the out of focus areas. It kind of starts to in these shadowy areas. I see that on this fence post. I know this seems silly, but the reason I use this is it is a good black and white ability test because there's lots of different kind of possibilities for tones. But also in these little cracks where it gets dark, as you move away from the focus plane, you will start to see like some of these crazy things and lenses that aren't well corrected for, you know, aberrations and things like that. And those don't like to correct either, like consistently they don't like to correct. Then we did this one at f5.6. Let's see if some of that wacky stuff is gone. It doesn't really sharpen up like that much, it doesn't seem like. Let's get in here at an unfair 200%. It definitely sharpens up, but it's not a super sharp lens. It's not like the 50mm f1.8s, which is really sharp. That lens is way too cheap. They could easily sell it for more money. I have to say, so far, I'm liking this about the same as I like the 35mm f1.4, which is, I think it's like perfectly fine. It's totally for someone, but I do think it's just a little bit better optically than the 35-1.4. I think if you had both of those in your bag, I think you'd be pretty happy with them. You know, saving a little money. You get f1.4 instead of f1.8, if that matters to you. Optically, this one is just a hair better than the 35-1.4. I don't think most people out there, I'm a freak. I don't think most people are gonna even notice, or the ones that do probably won't care. I was about right here in the editing of this video when I realized I didn't do black and white ability test. Well, we just can't have that. And so here we go. The rule is we just hit the black and white button with no other adjustments. It's pretty flat. It's not the flattest of flats, but it's pretty flat. Let's try it on this f2.81. It's pretty flat. Try it on the f5.6. This is the territory you get into where you start getting crispiness, giving it a metallic kind of feel. Yeah, it's just a pretty flat performance. I would probably have to give this a black and white ability of 1. If I graded things in halves, I would maybe give it a 1.5, but I don't, so it's a 1. But we can go and give it a Gravedigger. That helps a little bit, gives it a bit of a metallic-y kind of sheen. We have BW Grit and Gravy. I think I like Gravedigger a little more on this one. Just not a particularly good performance on black and white ability. But these rich presets do really help. Throw a little radial gradient on there. Boom, boom. Invert that. Give it a little boom. There we go. And that is our black and white ability test. All right, I did a little walk around in the backyard, just shooting some shallow depth of fieldy kind of stuff, right? Which is the kind of stuff I shoot most of the time with the f1.2s. And this lens has a pretty good amount of contrast. It's pretty rich. And this is why it's important to do actual real images, right? Because we can do this, we can see, oh yeah, the blues look good, you know, and the yellows look good, and the greens look good. But if you don't take actual images, like, I mean, what are you really doing? So, wow, I was way crooked on that one. Yeah, I haven't done anything to this. I shot this about right there is where I shot it, because I tend to shoot a little bit, a stop or so underexposed. If I bring that back, pretty nice looking image. I like all the little subtle colors in the background. They come through really well. Blues, greens, some red back there. And get in here, if we just pull the highlights a little. What do we shoot this at? Yep, f1.4, 20,000th of a second. Got some purple fringing right here. That's the price that you pay. Not bad, it's easy to correct if you wanted to correct it. I want to slap a preset on this. Actually, Gravedigger is spooky. We lose those colors that I was complimenting earlier, but that's just a one click. You can get that, by the way, at zwadephoto.com/digital products. That's spooky looking. It took nothing and made it spooky. And we did a little shallow depthy kind of deal here. Destroyed background at f1.4. I shot images like this because I wanted to make a determination of whether you could get into the style of photography that I love so much for so little money. And we're going to find out in a second. Let me slap a preset on this. I think I settled on Back Alley Blue. Let's check out the John Deere green. And letters 2 inches high. Road Z Wade loves Nikon. That's enough of that. This honestly doesn't need anything done to it. Like, I just brought it up. I didn't do anything to the colors, the contrast, anything. This is a pretty decent optic. It struggles with some of the things that, you know, we don't see too often anymore, but it has a nice fall off to the out of focus areas. It's really gradual. It's not a terrible optic. It just has some of the old school issues But, again, some of these modern lenses are too clinical. They overcorrect them so much that you actually lose things like this just inherent rich kind of coloration and contrast. And they got to correct for the contrast that they lost by trying to make it perfectly sharp with no vignetting, which I want to show you real quick. This lens has fierce vignetting. I think the vignetting is so bad that it screws up spot metering. This is at f1.4, and I mean, the vignetting is like almost to the center of the frame. And then we go to f2.8, and it's still there. And then we get to 5.6, and there's just a very small amount of it left. You're kind of used to seeing this kind of vignetting wide open, and this is at f5.6. So I don't really care about vignetting. It's easy to fix, and I end up adding some anyway. But this is a fierce vignetting. Before we get into more shallow depth of fieldy kind of stuff, where I was seeing if this was a viable option to get into that style of photography, I did a little experiment here. This is what these look like in focus, but I just kind of wanted to look at them out of focus. The backgrounds are real nice on this. This is very cool, very artistic. It's almost like a painting, right? You have all these kind of like colors and just like what is it? It's just abstract nothing. It's like on a canvas, and then you have like your subject. And that's pretty cool. I just noticed that we have reflections of the tree coming through there. That's pretty cool. Lots of like fringing and things like that on the little sparkles of the thing. But as far as the bokeh balls go, out here at the corner, it's not crazy. It's not like getting like lemon shaped. It's just kind of like oval. There's a little lemon kind of shape. I just kind of wanted to take a look at these bokeh balls, see what they look like, and just kind of focus on them a little bit. But this is the actual thing that we're looking at. Let's look at some shallow depth of fieldy kind of stuff. So I got this one. This one's great. Let's just throw like moody brown or something on it maybe. This is the kind of shallow depth of fieldy kind of stuff that I was experimenting with. We're real close to minimum focus, and this is looking kind of silly out here. I wouldn't recommend using this lens anywhere close to minimum focus because this is pretty ugly. When you back up, you get like a real nice fall off, but when you're up close, it's too aggressive, and this is just a little funny looking. At minimum focus, the sharpness is nothing to write home about. Yeah, I still think that some of the out of focus areas are just I mean, you can tell that you're getting a lens that costs less money. Tone-wise, though, it's really not bad. Let me experiment with this a little bit. Gravedigger looks pretty cool. It's a good starting point. BW Grit and Gravy, I probably prefer for that, but I want to do some of the color ones. Okay, I actually like Pinky in the Frame. Okay. I'm starting to develop more opinion on this little experiment that I'm doing about shallow depth of field photography, but I have a couple other images. I have this one, and then I have this one, which is a more flat angle, and I prefer this one. Out of focus area. When you're this close to minimum focus, which you should always, to get minimum focus, you should find minimum focus and back up a few inches, right? Otherwise, it's never going to be sharp. That's exactly what I did with this. Let me try this with some colors. I actually really like habanero, even though we do want to get the grain, but I kind of like that. All right, I've made up my mind. This is a good place for somebody to start if they want to experiment with the kind of photography that I do most of the time whenever I'm not on YouTube, and also a lot on YouTube. I think that this is an okay place to start. It has some issues that I don't like. The transition to the out of focus areas are real aggressive. Like they get silly fast. And so it's not ideal. I think you would probably enjoy more the 50mm f1.8s for experimenting with this type of photography, but it is something that you can start off with. I'd recommend renting it first, see if you like the results. Let's pull that color down just a little bit. That was a little magenta. That's not like a shift or anything like that. That's just how it reacted to, the small amount of editing that I did. I don't think this is a bad place to start. I also don't think that anybody would buy this to do this kind of photography personally. But anyway, we can move on to, we've got just a couple more images here. A little bit of orange peeking through an otherwise colorless landscape. It's art, get it? I'm kidding. I just thought that this little thing was interesting because it was the only bit of color on this tree. Let's just give this a quick vignette. A really aggressive one. Invert. There we go. We did something out of nothing. And then our final little walk around image here. I just like the way that the light was kind of coming through these leaves. We got the blue. The blue's a little bit aggressive for me. Pull that down to about there. Let's boost them oranges a little. Maybe do some overall saturation. I haven't even done any adjustments yet. Boom, 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 boom. And the lens gives us enough vignette that I'm happy with this. Not a bad lens, guys. I mean, it's really not a bad lens. So what conclusions can we draw on the Nikkor Z 50mm f1.4? I can't draw any conclusions without first starting with a bit of a comparison. The 50mm f1.4 and the 50mm f1.8s and the 35mm f1.4 and the 35mm f1.8s. One of the first lenses I tested in this adventure that I've been on for years was the 35mm f1.8s. And I said that that lens was overpriced for what you're getting because the 50mm f1.8s is just such a better lens optically and in performance. When they came out with the 35mm f1.4 non-S-line lens, it's just slightly less expensive than the 35mm f1.8s. So it too is inherently overpriced because the 35-18s needs to be the same price as the 50mm f1.8s. I think the 50mm f1.8s could be more expensive because it's such a good optic. And so this, coming in slightly less expensive than that, I actually think you're getting exactly what you pay for with this particular lens. If anything, slightly overpriced, maybe knock $100 off tops, and then it's exactly what you pay for. Consider trying out both 50mm, the f1.8s and the f1.4. You should rent them yourself, as I have done for this video, and see if you prefer one over the other. This one, however, is fun to use. It's got good contrast. The color saturation is good. The out of focus areas get a little silly at minimum focus, but when you back up from that, it looks good. The image comes together in a really good way when you have decent distance between your camera and your subject. The vignetting, I was shocked by the vignetting. It's bad. It's bad on this lens. It's some of the worst vignetting I've seen in a long time. You would expect it to kind of clear up by f4. It doesn't, right? It's bad vignetting performance. I don't care about that. If you do, it's just something to keep in mind. Overall, this is not a bad lens. You may enjoy this, or if you just are tired of the clinical nature of lenses, if you're tired of no compromises and you want some compromise, maybe you like this. Maybe you like the wacky out of focus areas at, minimum focus. This lens is certainly for somebody, just like the 35-1.4 is for somebody, the 35-1.8 is for somebody. Make sure you're okay with the compromises that we really haven't seen that much since the F-mount days. It's very, very reminiscent of F-mount lenses. It'll be very middle of the road, I think, in my grade at zwadephoto.com/theopticexplorer. If you want to pick up some presets, zwadephoto.com/digital products. I'm Z Wade, the Z Wade, and Z Wade Photo. Stay sharp, YouTube.